In today's Necron video, we are going to talk about Necron Secondary Objectives. Have you been using them? It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to learn about Necrons and more, then please subscribe and turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload. Right, welcome. Today we are talking about Necron dedicated secondary objectives. That's the objectives that you see not in this book, chapter approved, but in this one, the Necron Codex. I am recording this on my OBS setup, which is quite new for me. I'm using my laptop webcam, so I'm not quite sure what the quality is going to be like, but hopefully it will be all okay. Now I've got a very interesting list for us to have a look at. It's from the ITC Battle app, and it's a list of how secondary objectives, in particular Codex dedicated ones, are faring on the grand tournament scene. So it's going to be very interesting having a look at the rankings of these secondary objectives, and of course we're going to have a chat about each one. Now first of all, let's have a look at the list. So this is the list of all the different codices and how they're faring with their dedicated Codex secondary objectives. Now I can't actually see this list because it's very small on OBS. Well, I could if I did this with my varifocals, however I'm not going to do that. I've written it down, I've got some notes, so that's why I'm looking down here. So the first one at the top of the list, in, well, 7th position out of the whole list, which is pretty good, is Code of Combat. Now this is in the No Mercy No Respite category, so it is competing with No Prisoners, Grind Them Down, and To the Last. Now I do use Grind Them Down quite a lot, especially against my Orc opponents, because there's a lot of units to kill and I get 3 points each turn that I kill more, so I've got a good chance of getting some points. However, Code of Combat is 3 points each time your noble character kills a unit. Now I would imagine that this is quite high because people are playing the Silent King, and if you're taking the Silent King, the Code of Conduct is probably a good secondary objective. The Silent King has a good chance of killing stuff in both shooting and in close combat, and yeah, you can rack up some points fairly easy. However, of course, also especially in a competitive environment, the Silent King could go down quite quickly unless you're very clever hiding it with terrain. So obviously this is just an average score, so let's have a look at the stats. So this particular secondary was chosen 377 times, which is 12% of the time, and the average score was 9.5 points. 9.5 out of 15. Now obviously that means a good majority of people probably have scored a lot more points than that, but also means that a lot of people probably have scored lower than that. Obviously it's just an average, but 9.5 points is pretty good. Now obviously some secondaries will allow you to score the maximum points of 15 points, but there are also some secondaries that you take where you know you aren't going to score the maximum amount of points. However, maybe those points are easier to score, they're sort of almost an automatic score, so you have to make a decision. Do you want to score, say, 9 or 10 almost guaranteed points, or do you want to take your chance, and if all goes well you can score 15, but then if it doesn't go well you may only score 3 or 5. So you have to make some decisions, and of course those decisions generally start in the list building stage, which we'll talk more about later. But yeah, Code of Combat, I'm going to be using it when I play the Silent King, and I'm pretty sure, well, maybe, I mean, you could have overlords, you know, in command barges, which can also do this particular secondary, but I think probably those lists, in that list there, or pretty much mostly have the Silent King in it. Okay, let's have a look at the next best performing one. It's a few points down, and it's Purge the Vermin. Now this was chosen a whopping 1,135 times, 37% of the time, with an average score of 8.9, so basically 9 points. Now, Purge the Vermin is a battlefield supremacy category 1, so you are competing with engage on all fronts, behind enemy lines, and stranglehold, so it's a big category. Now, the way Purge the Vermin works is you get 2 points for each quarter that your enemy isn't in. Now, I don't take this particular objective, and one of the reasons for that is I generally play against orcs, which are very fast, and there's a lot of them. They can get in table quarters very easily. Actually, you know, they would take table quarters as one of their secondary objectives, so I don't take this. However, if I was against an army that was either slow or that liked to hold back a bit, then this would be ideal. I mean, if you can hold 2 quarters, that's 4 points each turn. You can build those points up very quickly, and even if you just had 1 quarter for the whole of the game, that's 8 points. You can't score this in turn 1, so it's from turn 2 onwards, but yeah, 8 points just for holding 1 quarter. Pretty decent, and that's obviously proved to be decent by how many times people are taking these particular objectives. However, engage on all fronts, stranglehold, you know, they are big competitors, but I suppose the issue with those two is it's 3. You have to be in either 3 table quarters to get 2 points, 4 table quarters to get 3 points, and then you have to be on 3 objectives and more objectives than your opponent to get your 3 points on engage on all fronts. So if you don't have 3 objectives, you get 0. So I can see how Purge the Vermin has been a popular choice. However, average is still only 8.9. I say only because that is a decent amount, but yeah, potentially with Stranglehold and Engage you could definitely score more. This one I think is definitely situational, and it depends mostly on your opponent more than the deployment map. But if your enemy is not very fast and likes to stand back, this is a perfect secondary objective. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. Okay, a few spots down, and we've got Treasures of Eons, and this again is a battlefield supremacy objective, competing with engage on all fronts and stranglehold, and of course behind enemy lines. Not that I ever take that because I'm Necrons. I could do it, make a list to do that, but I don't. So this was taken 140 times, and actually not that much. That's just 5% of the time. Average score 8.3, still a reasonable average score. So the way this works is your opponent gets to pick 3 objectives, and then if you score those objectives you get 2 points for holding 1, 3 points for holding 2, and 5 points for holding 3 of those objectives. Now I think this is definitely a mission based objective. You're going to want to take this when there's either only 4 objectives, or ideally if there's only 1 objective in your opponent's deployment zone, because of course they are going to choose that one, which means you've got the chance of getting 2 objectives. I think if you take this you should be aiming to get 2 objectives, that's 3 points a turn, and it could coincide with the other primary objectives as well. I think the missions which are best suited to this is Battle Line, Sweep and Clear, and Vital Intelligence, because they either have a lot of objectives in no man's land or they're only 4 objectives, and I think that's definitely a situational one depending on the mission. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. The least performing one is Ancient Machineries, which I suppose is a bit of a surprise. You see a lot of people raving on about it. However, it is a shadow operations one. It's competing with Raise the Banner, Retrieve Octarius Data, and Teleport Homers, etc. It's been selected 242 times, which is actually 8% of the time, so actually more than the last couple we looked at, but only scoring an average of 6.9, which I think is pretty low. I think the reason why it's pretty low is because it of course is an action, but it's an action which you have to wait a whole turn to do. So basically you do it at the end of the movement phase, and yes, canoptic units as well as infantry can do it, so it has a benefit over maybe some of the others like raise the banner. However, it doesn't actually give you the points until the end of your next command phase, so your opponent has a whole turn to stop you doing it. It is 3 points per action though. I think that's the main issue with this one, and whilst it all sounds good, in reality it's hard to do, plus your opponent gets to pick the 2 objectives and you get to pick 1. You're not going to want to take this when there's just 1 or maybe 2 in no man's land. You really want 3 in there, otherwise you're going to limit your chances of actually scoring it, and the fact that you have to be there for a turn I think just makes it even worse. So at least if you take, for example, Octarius data, then you get to do that in your turn and your opponent can't do anything about it, so it's almost like a guaranteed one. Whereas yeah, this one is not guaranteed, it's circumstantial and it's doable. You know, stick some scarabs on an objective, they're hard to shift, and do this action. But yeah, obviously it's not the best, and I think the stats prove it. So there you go, pretty interesting reading. It certainly made me have a closer look at those Necron objectives to make sure I'm not missing out on anything. Now, when selecting secondary objectives, obviously the key thing is to build your list around those secondary objectives, or at least to pre-plan, once you have your list, which objectives are going to suit your list the best. And of course that all changes depending on the mission and also your opponent. So I think the best thing to do is actually have a bit of a plan. I would suggest having 2 objectives that you take pretty much all of the time, and then have 1 objective where you can change it depending on the mission and your opponent's list. However, even those fixed 2 objectives, I think each one would probably be best to have a backup option. So you could have this particular objective which maybe this mission doesn't suit it, so I'll go for this one. Does that make sense? So in other words, have a plan but also be flexible. Don't just engage on all fronts because it's the one you always take. You know, it's the one that works best with the army. Is it for this particular mission, for this particular deployment map, for the opponent that you're facing, for the units your opponent has? So yeah, have a plan but be flexible, but certainly have a look at all of the secondary objectives. Start to learn them. The more you play, the more you'll realise how important they are and how picking the right ones at the right time can be. Now I've got a few other videos similar to this one which I think you will enjoy watching next, so here is the playlist for you to check out.